It's on AM 560, The Answer.
Get the latest weather, traffic, and news updates online at 560theanswer.com.
This hourly segment is brought to you by Goldilocks, offering smart security systems to homes and businesses. Call Goldilocks at 708-889-5600.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Things don't seem to be improving in terms of the prospects for peace in Eastern Europe. Over the weekend, Putin launching his largest ever drone and missile attack on Ukraine. More than 350 explosive drones targeting Ukrainian cities over the weekend, to which Trump responded thusly.
Yeah, I'll give you an update. I'm not happy with what Putin's doing. He's killing a lot of people, and I don't know what the hell happened to Putin. I've known him a long time, always gotten along with him, but he's sending rockets into cities and killing people, and I don't like it at all, okay? We're in the middle of talking, and he's shooting rockets into Kiev and other cities. I don't like it at all.
Mr. President, what do you want to do about that?
I'm surprised. I'm very surprised. We'll see what we're going to do. What am I going to tell you?
Well,
You're the fake news, aren't you? You're totally fake. All right, any other questions? I don't like what Putin is doing, not even a little bit. He's killing people. And something happened to this guy, and I don't like it. That's all I have to say.
Okay, well, he's been killing people for a long time. I don't know that anything happened to him other than he thinks that perhaps America and the West are so desperate for peace that and unwilling to do anything to pressure him to peace that he can get more aggressive, because that's clearly what he's done. And maybe if he's more aggressive, then he'll get more out of any sort of peace deal that could be in the offing. But he's killing people, and I'm very surprised because why? Because you thought you had a personal kinship with him, and so because you're friendly, that he's going to do your bidding rather than his own? Seems a little naive. Ian Williams is a former foreign correspondent for the BBC Channel 4 News and NBC, also author of Vampire State: The Rise and Fall of the Chinese Economy. Ian Williams, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Dan.
Putin is not particularly impressed, it would seem, with the carrot and stick routine that the West, America and Europe in particular, are playing, it would seem.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see any intention from Putin to take this peace process seriously. I think he's strung along Trump right from the start. I don't think he's had any intention of meaningfully engaging on this. His maximalist demands, which is effectively the dismantling of the Ukrainian state, the installation of a puppet government, remain exactly as they have been. And it's incredible that it has taken this long for Trump to apparently realize that Putin is stringing him along and simply not taking this seriously. And I guess the frustration in Kiev is that if Trump had been anywhere near as tough with Putin as he has tried to be with Zelensky, then perhaps there might have been a little bit of progress had he put some pressure on Putin to seriously engage in this. And you do wonder now where it's going to go. Does Trump step up with sanctions, with an increase in support for Ukraine? We've seen the lifting of restrictions on the range of weapons that can be fired into Russia, or will he simply walk away? It's a difficult dilemma right now.
Well, I mean, to be fair to Trump, he also said prior to this drone attack over the weekend, said last week, basically the reporting was that he sent the message to the EU, you're going to have to ratchet it up because whatever you're doing is not working. And part of why it's not working is because, on the one hand, there's a lot of saber rattling from Western Europe. On the other hand, there's a lot of business dealing between Western Europe and Russia.
There is, and I think oil is the big one here. I think a lot of countries have not done everything they can do in terms of sanctioning Russia, and sanctioning Russia where it really hurts, which is on raw materials, which is on oil. And I think there are a number of states in Europe that have wanted to have it both ways, yet they've been there with the rhetoric, they've been on the train to Kiev, they've stood shoulder to shoulder with Zelensky, and they've made the right noises, and they've criticized Trump, of course, but they haven't stepped up economically to the extent they could and they should. So, I think we're reaching an inflection point here where a lot of people are going to have to take things a lot more seriously than they have until now.
And so, I mean, do you have any sense of, because, Keir Starmer in the UK has made noise about willingness to send, quote unquote, peacekeeping troops and, at least rhetorically offering more support. But I mean, is anybody in Western Europe, Macron or Sturmer in particular, going to take the lead here and do something material that is beyond just sort of voicing open-ended possible support at some point in the indeterminate future?
I think that's the key question, and that's the dilemma. I think initially it seemed like Starmer was standing up, that he gathered other leaders. The talk was of standing together, of a European-led initiative to put troops even into Ukraine. But I think that as the weeks have gone by, they've progressively stepped back from that, and what had appeared initially as a stabilization force, as a force that would be there, if only symbolically, to try and keep the peace in Ukraine, has been somewhat watered down. And certainly here in London, there's a lot of skepticism about the ability of Starmer to live up to the early rhetoric which he had, and to actually deliver with troops. I mean, the British economy at the moment is under a lot of strain. Yes, there's a promise to increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP, but the British Armed Forces are very thinly spread, and there's some scepticism even about the ability to field a force that would be meaningful, and certainly which would be taken seriously by Putin.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that Putin is reading the West right, which is there's really no appetite for certainly deployment of troops. There is, and I'm sure he gets the sense of where public opinion is in places like the UK and the US as well on this. And there's barely any appetite to provide more support for Ukraine in terms of munitions. And so why shouldn't I continue to press my advantage? I mean, from his perspective as somebody who invaded Ukraine, I mean, I did this for a reason, and I've spent 1 million lives. Why not be maximalist in my approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the economy in Russia is coming under much more pressure. There was, that period when it seemed to defy all expectations, when they maintained fairly high rates of growth, when enormous amounts of public spending, particularly on the military, seeped through to the economy in Russia. And it seemed that they were pretty well defying all the pressure that was put on them. I do get the sense now that economically things are starting to bite in Russia. And you do have to ask yourself how much they can sustain the sort of attrition that we're seeing, both in terms of the losses on the battlefield, in terms of troops, in terms of equipment. But he certainly thinks that he can go for the maximalist position, that he can outlast the Europeans, and he can see off any pressure from the United States. And I think we are in a critical stage now that for all the rhetoric we've seen, particularly from European leaders, that they really need to step up and demonstrate that they are willing to put some muscle behind the words that they've been using. And I do think that unless Europe is seen to be leading the way on this and is seen to be showing a little bit more determination in actual practical ways, then I don't see Trump following simply following through and saying, look, I'll provide a backstop for you. I think any backstop would depends entirely on Europe stepping up.
Yeah, and I mean, it seems to me he's trying to give Europe more latitude to do exactly that. I think the two, although I don't know, but it seems to me the two are connected. And when I say the two, I mean his announcement that he's pushing back the tariff deadline on the European Union from June 1st to July 9th to give negotiators more time to try to cut a deal to avert the imposition of those tariffs. And it seems to me, okay, look, I'm not going to further hamstring your economies. But number one, we have to get a deal done. But I want to get a deal done. And number two, I want you to take the lead in Eastern Europe and help me figure out this Ukraine thing.
I think so. And I think there are a lot of these sort of subtexts now in these trade deals. I see this very much as sort of the next stage of the trade war, if you like, that Trump is looking for other concessions in other policy areas, almost as the price for continuing business as normal with the U.S. We're seeing this with China, and I think we'll see it also with Russia, that he's expecting Europe to really follow through with the rhetoric. It's all very well saying we're at one with Zelensky. It's all very well getting on the train to Kiev on a regular basis. But we really have to see this followed through with sanctions, particularly where there are countries who are not pulling their weight, which are still supporting the Russian economy with the purchase of oil and gas, and with Europe meaningfully spelling out what it's prepared to do militarily as a stopgap force, as a force to help police any ceasefire if it comes along. I don't think that this is unreasonable, and I don't think it's seen that way by realists in Europe.
Well, and to your point about sort of the next phase of the trade war, and one of the other aspects of Trump's policy vision that's being served by providing more time to the EU to get a deal done is trying to isolate China, right? You wrote about this, that, sort of implicit in these deals, that the frameworks that have been announced for deals like with the UK is to cease doing business with China.
I think that's right, Dan. I think this is very much the next phase of the trade war. In a sense, what we saw before there was a lot of noise, a lot of fury, but the ultimate aim of trying to reduce dependencies on China, to try and reorder sensitive supply chains, to block China from access to critical technologies, I think remains the underlying aim. And I think the UK-US draft trade deal was very instructive because it contained security provisions, it contained language about countering dumping, subsidies, non-market practices. And we're also seeing that language now being introduced in Brussels as part of this discussion for a new trade pact. We saw it in the foreign ministers' G7 communique in France just a few days ago, that they are now embracing some of these concepts. And I think that it will be fundamental to striking these future trade deals. It'll be very much the message will be the price of doing business is to keep with the U.S. is to keep China at bay. And I think China recognizes this, which is a reason why they've reacted so angrily, because in a sense, this is in the medium term much more damaging for them than the trade war, which in many ways they benefited from because they could parade themselves as being somehow bastions of free trade, victims, which of course is complete nonsense when you look at China's policies over recent years. But I think what worries them far more is this concerted effort to bring allies and other trade partners on board with an agenda which says, look, we've got to reorder sensitive supply chains away from China. We've got to look at technology more closely. We've got to look at non-market practices, subsidies, dumping, overproduction. And I think that increasingly people are coming around to this way of thinking. They already were in many respects. It's already been high on the European agenda. But sometimes, especially when you're dealing with Brussels, you do need sometimes a bit of a kick to focus minds.
Well, what about President Trump making this declarative statement last week or the week before, I believe, that all Apple iPhones should be manufactured in the United States?
that was intriguing for me, Amy, because I mean, it does show in a sense the difference. I mean, tariffs are very crude. It's an extraordinarily crude weapon, and iPhones are assembled from multiple parts and components which come from all over the world. A lot of the value in an iPhone is already produced in the US because of all the design that goes into chips, into other systems. A lot of the components come from elsewhere, and they're assembled in China, yes, but that's only a small part of their value. And I think that the iPhone supply chain is immensely complicated, and the notion that we can just sort of stick 25% on the price of an import really doesn't go anywhere near grasping that complexity.
But to me, that statement was part of this macro game that Trump is playing with the Chinese Communist Party, because, you know, the initial imposition of tariffs, and you got Tim Cook running to the White House, and then they get a special waiver and they get more time to deal with their supply chain, right? So it's very much like what you were talking about with these riders, sort of de facto riders, even though we're still in the framework stage of these deals that says don't do business with China, or, you know, implications to that effect. This is a way to enforce a sense of urgency with the Chinese Communist Party to get a deal done that is to Trump's liking. Because, of course, remember, we're talking about this against the backdrop of Bessent's announcement after the meeting in Switzerland that we have a framework. But this is the way to enforce getting from a framework to a deal, is to continue to put pressure on the regime, making statements like that about Apple, continuing to push these riders in potential deals with the EU and the UK and other trading partners. You have to have this enforcement mechanism so that the Chinese Communist Party can't slow walk the administration.
I think that's right, and it's all about wrong footing your opponents, or wrong footing even your allies and your trading partners. It's even if it only for a moment concentrates Tim Cook's mind in terms of where he's going to put a future plant or a future factory, perhaps not to do the entire manufacturing process because that's realistic, but also sending a message to China, to the Chinese Communist Party, that, hey, wait a minute, for all this basking, as you have seen in Beijing, you know, the nationalists declaring victory in the trade war, the message is, hang on a minute, this is about far more than tariff. This is about a fundamental reordering of supply chains, and there is a lot more to this. I think as well that there's a sense that China is overplaying its hand, because yes, it's true that Trump to some extent has been hemorrhaging trust among trading partners and others, but you know, China never had much trust in the first place. And the notion that it can easily leverage and take advantage of what Trump is doing, I think is very short-sighted. And you're seeing this a lot in Southeast Asia, in the global south, as it's frequently called now, that, you know, yes, they're confused, they're wrong-footed, they're trying to figure out how they can do a deal with Trump, but they're certainly not rushing to embrace China, because, you know, they've had plenty of experience of Chinese coercion over the years and rule-breaking, and you know, quite ugly nationalism. And so it's quite interesting the way all these messages are played and the way the messages are received and the sort of impact it's having on geopolitics, which I think is much more complex than perhaps we'd fully appreciate when we just concentrate too much on the rhetoric coming from Trump.
Ian Williams is a former foreign correspondent for BBC Channel 4 News and NBC, author of Vampire State, The Rise and Fall of the Chinese Economy. Ian, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
A pleasure.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's what Chicago is talking about. It's Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy on AM 560. The Answer.
As you know, our friend Mike Lindell has a passion to help everyone get the best sleep of your life. He didn't stop by simply creating the best pillow. Mike created the best bed sheets ever. They look and feel great, which means an even better night's sleep for me, which is crucial for my busy schedule. Mike is offering the best deal on his Giza Dreams bed sheets. Any size and any color, just $49.98. That's right, you can even get queens, kings, split kings, and cow kings. Any size and any color, just $49.98. Order now because when they're gone, they're gone. Also, for a limited time, when your order is over $100,